Amaran and Irish School.
Sokol.
Sokol. See, I'm going by what they said the other day.
That's right. Irish
Sokol.
School. I think that is
Sokol.
perfect.
So we are sitting here in Virginia. Everyone's coming in and eating breakfast. And we're going to sit here and be talking about growth mindset. So I'll let Pam and Ira introduce themselves.
Hi.
And
Hello, Billy.
How are
it's
you?
good to see you. It's good to see a crowd here this morning gathering around. And I think that one of the things that I would want people to know is that I work as an educator in Albemarle County Public Schools. Most days call myself the superintendent, but like to think of myself as just part of a really great learning team.
Sorry. I'm Ira Sokol. I also work in Albemarle County Schools. I work in ed tech. I work in learning space design. I work with libraries in our division, and I'm happy to be here. I've never done this live. I mean, usually, as I was just saying, Sat Chat is best done for bed on Saturday morning. This is mighty early, but I'm learning to do it.
But here you are.
Growth mindset.
You are here. So, where do we want to start, Billy?
so maybe we'll start with question one. Even though question one's going to get tweeted out in a couple minutes, we could start with it and we could go on and talk more about growth mindset. I know the theme here for ASCD this year is growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And just talking in general about from a growth standpoint, a personal and also an organizational standpoint. So if you're talking growth, is talking about learning, taking risks. How do you take risks every day?
Wow. Well, I think that if you get up with the attitude that you're going to be out there trying to meet the needs of kids in our schools, and so I'm going to think about this through an educator lens, that you are always going to be almost every day of your career faced with decisions that you have to make where you may have to take a look at, so do I do this on behalf of the kid, or do I do this, which is what most people would do or what the rules say I should do? So if you're keeping kids at the center of your work, you're probably taking risk almost every day of your career to really think about, how do I do something differently that's going to help this kid be successful? So I think that would be what I would say. Ira, where would you land on that one?
Well, I think from a personal point of view, I think that idea that you will learn every day starts with who you are and as a person. I worry about people who don't ever go out and explore new things on a steady basis. I mean, you don't have to be like me. I've had like 12 careers in my life, and that's given me a lot of experience, across the board. But people who go places, people who follow their passions, so they're learning new stuff every day. One of the things that I noticed when I got involved in education is that in two previous careers in design and architecture and as a New York City police officer, we're actually taught how to see things. That was a really important part of education, was how to see most widely and see what was going on at any particular moment. I think we have to be better as educators at learning how to do that. When things freeze in education, it's because we believe that we know what's going on instead of looking at it. We believe that we know who students are instead of looking at them and seeing who they are right at that moment in that day. So I think it does start with who you are, what risks you take in your life to do things that you don't think you know how to do, so that you're learning all the time.
But I do sometimes think that educators are really risk averse. That we're in a profession that really encourages compliance, that encourages people to stay inside the boundaries. And so when we've had things that have come forward, sometimes out in the political world, that we should challenge as educators, sometimes we back away from those things because we feel like we are supposed to follow the rules. That's what we teach kids to do, is follow rules. And now all of a sudden we're in a world where we're encouraging people to actually challenge rules. And that's really starting to have some impact on, I think, the way that educators think about themselves.
Now, speaking of that, you're a superintendent in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
How do you encourage your teachers in the schools to take risks?
Well, I think that in a variety of ways. One is that we have probably one of the least top-down decision-making systems that you'll find anywhere, that we really have been going back for almost 2 decades to find ourselves as being more about being site-based in terms of decision processes. Although some people might say, that if in a site, whether it's a school or a department, if the person at the top of the department or the school is the one making the decisions, then that's not the same as when you're really trying to build collaborative decisions. And so, we really try to define ourselves as a place where, our teachers, we want them involved in every aspect of the decision-making processes around the work that we do, whether it's curriculum, whether it's, making changes in assessment. How do we really build diverse teams to make the decisions that we move forward?
That's so important, to be able to have teachers to be able to make those decisions. And even just thinking, we've been talking about the different types of mindsets and being able to not be fixed on, this is the way you're doing it, this is the only way you can do it, and being able to have that open conversation with teachers and allowing the teachers to do it. I don't know, Ira, if you want to.
Well, what's key is to just encourage the risk taking all the time. And I'll tell one, quick story from one of our high school libraries, when a librarian came to me and said she was concerned because there was one group of, children who were not really using the library in the whole school. And this is a library that's packed every single day. But the goal of the school is to have the library be the commons at the center of the community, and to have everybody in there so they're interacting and learning from each other. So there was one group of rural boys who just weren't in there. There seemed to be nothing of interest to them. So she asked about bringing small engine repair into the library. And I said, it's an awesome idea. I'll buy you, an oil mat for the floor. And it's so easy in places to say, have you really thought about this? This sounds pretty crazy. Are you sure you want to do that? What permissions do you need? But you empower people by saying, that's a great idea. What do we need? We probably need to be able to clean up the floor, which is the key, which is the only impediment to doing this. And by having a team that does that, and I think our whole central administrative team does that all the time, that's a great idea. Let's do it. It's Pam's. How do you get to yes? Which is the critical thing. You encourage risk by embracing it.
Yeah, and an example this summer, we, as I said yesterday at L2L, the conference here with ASCD, that we really have sustained a commitment to the arts across a period of time, where many places across the country have cut arts, cut libraries. And one of the things that's pretty interesting is that we started running open fine arts academies in the summertime for kids who want to continue doing art year round. And so they can sign up and come, and we make things free. Some are free, some have some slight charges to it. But we had some teachers come forward and say, you know what? We were at the Cleveland, is it a rock museum that's up there? Right. Yeah, Museum of Rock.
Right.
And he said, I want to do a rock and rap academy. And so, most people don't see that as in the wheelhouse of arts. But we said, yeah, let's give it a try. So we built it out. We put it out there. We made it free for kids, because a lot of the kids that would be interested in that kind of work are not necessarily kids that have the kinds of family income that they would be able to come. And this summer we have about 60 kids in a rock, pop, and rap academy and one of our high school libraries, coming from all over the community. It's pretty exciting to see what these kids are producing. And that's not something that, if you really are in that yes mode instead of the yeah but mode, you got to take risk on people that have those ideas. You know what a teacher said to me as a result of that? Said, you know what, Pam, when I'm doing this kind of work, I am far less focused on things like my salary and benefits and those things. I said, well, you need to be always focused on that. But the reality is, when teachers are feeling a level of passion, that's what we want. Because I tell you what, the whole No Child Left Behind movement really sucked. That standardization movement has sucked the passion out of education. So I think it's our job to just restore it. And one of the ways you restore it is by opening the door for people to do things that are interesting.
And it's true.
She's nervous about the body painting academy.
Yeah, that one. We'll talk about that one later on.
Well, with that being said, and that actually goes into our next question, what school structures need to change to align with trust and children's personal capabilities to learn, and not just children's, but also teachers, because teachers are learning just as well, and also
Mhm.
administrators.
You know, we have a number of things that we're really trying to break down, I think, that are important to break down. And when we talked yesterday at the conference here, we talked about the history, you know, of American education, how we got the system that we have, which, you know, and the system that we have was not based on all kids succeeding, and it was not based on encouraging children to take risks at all, quite the opposite. So how do we start to break things down in sort of experimental ways to do things? And we have so many structures, you know, some imposed on us, but many not when you actually try things. So in one of our elementary schools in August, we'll be opening up, you know, a fully multi-age environment to sort of get rid of the born on date teaching model that we're so stuck with. We'll have 120 kids and 6 teachers, K through 5, you know, in a space that we've designed not to be a 70s open space that's just a blank environment, but a series of areas that are designed around sort of content things. But in the rest of the school, we're trying to reorganize it so that instead of having a 3rd grade hallway and a 5th grade hallway, we have classrooms lined up K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 next to each other. So kids get to work together and see things. That anybody can do this. It doesn't really cost any money. It's just enabling the environment that that lets kids work in a new way and that trusts them. And, you know, to demonstrate the stuff, we've done things like the Coder Dojo Academy, which is kids 5 through 18, all working together. The Rock and Rap Academy has kids 7 through 18 in the same, working together. You know, we have to show people that our traditional way of dividing children up doesn't make any sense. Also, you know, how do we break down the thing of honors classes and advanced classes and, you know, standard classes? Because that pretends the kids are locked. We are locking kids into a position, and we're locking ourselves into a mindset when we see that. But there's also, you know, the whole nature of how discipline works in schools, of what our school days look like. Time is a huge thing. We've had elementary teachers say very clearly, can we have days when the kids stay with us all day like they did in the 1960s? And we have a number of days a week when we do that, so we're not interrupted every minute by schedule changes and specials and stuff. This is counter to what people sometimes think teachers are asking for. When you really listen to teachers, you're hearing a different story.
Well, and I think that, you know, for example, we had a small group of people come in to watch a video, Most Likely to Succeed, which I am really recommending that anybody that has the opportunity to go take a look at that film, go online to the website and take a look at it. It's very much of a lift film. And it features, to a great extent, High Tech High and the High Tech High Network, which, of course, is a charter system. But one of the things that's pretty interesting is that the guy that produced it says, how do we really figure out how to make these kinds of opportunities available for kids across our comprehensives? Because if we're always depending upon special kinds of schools to do interesting work with kids or to give kids choices, how will we ever, in a country as big as this, be able to really make the changes that we need to make? So I had a high school principal that watched some of that with us, and he came back and he said, you know, I'm really thinking I would love to be able to build a small, and we do kind of small pilots in Albemarle to try things out, small pilot in a high school, take comprehensive high school, 2,000 kids, take a group of kids and give teachers, a team of teachers, the opportunity to say, we're not going to worry about seat time, we're not going to worry about length of periods. What we're going to do is to build curriculum with kids that they can go through and be able to have all the time they need. We're going to do integrated content. He's had a team of teachers working on it, and they're really jazzed. And we went from that last April to that's going to be in place in just 3 weeks for kids to enter in one of our high schools. What I'd like to think about is that we learn from our small pilots how to then be able to take the best of those ideas and figure out who else wants to try this? And it may look different. And just like with our libraries, that none of our libraries looks exactly the same anymore, but they all are doing interesting things around the big idea of how do kids search, connect, communicate, and make in the library environment. So we want to be able to do that in ways that almost take away the standardization of anything in our schools. And that's, I think, a big challenge. But boy, do people get excited when they get the opportunity to give those things a try.
And, it's important, especially if, being a teacher, being in a classroom, having the fact that leadership wants to be able to allow us to create and grow. Are there ways in which, you encourage teachers? I know, how many school districts do you have that you're in charge of? How many schools are you in charge of?
26 schools, about 14,000 kids when you add our preschoolers in.
So how do you keep in charge of all of that to be able to encourage all those teachers to grow and think outside of the box?
Well, I think that one of the ways is through that systemic sort of efforts that we make to non-standardize the work that we're doing. At a point in time where everybody was really embedded in how do you create tests that help kids practice in order to do well on tests that they're going to take at the end of the year, we said, what we really want to be about is lifelong learning. So we kicked out years ago seed grants and said to teachers, build the kind of learning that you think kids would do that would have them be highly engaged, thinking at high levels, doing interdisciplinary work. Teachers built those, and from that came what we call our lifelong learning competencies. And so we say that we want our kids when they graduate to be kids that are, for a lifetime, ready to be able to do things like defend arguments, plan and conduct research, lead a healthy and well lifestyle, to be able to use a variety of different forms of media to communicate opinions and so forth, so that when they go out, that whether they're going directly into the workforce, post-secondary education, home, community, they're taking with them a set of portable skills. Our teachers have continued to build that across the system. And we look to teacher leaders, and we look to increasingly today, one of the things that I'm focused on is, and I love a book that's called Rookie Smarts by Liz Wiseman. And that is, to a great extent, something that I think is about the emerging leaders. How do you look to younger generation educators that are out there who maybe don't meet the criteria for what we typically think that you have to be a leader, which is experience and degree, advanced degrees and so forth. But how do you look to younger generation rookies to be able to inform up different ways of thinking about things that perhaps people of my generation don't think about? And so it was fascinating. Our assistant superintendent, after reading that book, fell in love with the idea of reverse mentoring. He went to a first-year assistant principal and said, I want you to mentor me this year so that when I'm going through processes of trying to think through things, I want you to be my mentor. So he was actually mentored by an assistant principal who was in her first year. The other thing he did was the first year he came to work in central office, he said, Pam, the last time he was a high school principal, the last time I was a teacher was in the last century. And he said, I'd like to be able to go back into the classroom for part of the year or the year and teach high school English again circa 2012, not 1995. So he took the risk to go back in, throw himself into an English department and taught a class that year. How cool is that?
That is, it's so cool that you're able to have the teacher to be able to do that, and just the willpower to, forward thinking, and you're not on the fixed mindset. We're talking, the mindset of being able to think and go and just do and explore.
Well, and that's all the matter of, encouraging. I tell people that I have a great job. A big part of my job is driving around and saying, that's a really cool idea. Let's see how we can make it go. But one of the things, and Dave Britton on Twitter had, a thing that we need change a lot, and we need to redesign more than change in a lot of cases. And so one of the things is to take an idea and see how we can push it up into something bigger. Because sometimes teachers will only see things from their classroom or people will see things from their area of responsibility. And it's our job to sort of expand that. So in one of our high schools, two of our high schools, beginning in 3 weeks, we'll have open shops. The shops will operate like libraries. People can walk into them whenever to do whatever they want. There'll be classes in there, but they'll just be free-flowing places. And one because we sort of just kept upping the ante. We're literally tearing down the walls between the hallways and the shop. And when one of the architects said to the assistant principal there, "Are you concerned about noise?" he simply said, "Noise attracts kids." And so why wouldn't we do that? So, one of the things is to take an idea and shift it up into a fundamental rethink, a fundamental redesign of what's going on. So we'll walk, Pam will do it, I will do it, walk through buildings with principals and identify spaces that should be shared and flexible, identify, places in the hallways where kids should be hanging out. And that's at any grade, try to do things that really shift how the school looks to kids. And that's a critical part of it, is how do we change things? One of the things from our summer experiences that we've learned and we've demonstrated to people really clearly is that multi-age works, less teaching, more opportunity works. Putting resources out in front of kids works instead of delivering things to them. And that's all sort of a fundamental change in what education has looked like, over the last 150, 180 years. In addition, our next challenge, and this is a big thing from our assistant superintendent, is, as he says, the way we grade children is the last point of child abuse we have in our system. So we have to change that. We have to stop telling people they know 83% of something. We have to make sure teachers never give zeros out, because why would anybody give a child a negative 65?
Well, and I think that one of the things I've been really interested in is following a group on Facebook that's all about throwing out grades. And it's been really interesting to see some of the challenges that teachers have when you think about fixed mindset, that if you're a teacher in a school and you're really trying to get away from traditional grading as a mechanism for, quote, motivating kids to do well in school, boy, the pushback that you can get from peers is pretty significant, because that is one of the traditions that we've all been raised and to be a part of a grading system. But I always loved it because I can't remember, and I would love to attribute this to the person who originated it, said there's, a couple things in life that are worth grading, and one is eggs and the other is probably meat, but that, applying that to children is really maybe not the best thing that we do to really have kids feel that learning is something that they are intrinsically in love with being a part of. And so, in some ways, maybe grading is one of the last bastions of things that we have to take on as an educational community.
And I know there's a lot out there on one of the Facebook communities, throw out grades. It's, there's a big
group.
movement. Star Saxon,
Yeah.
who's up in New York, is big on that she doesn't really grade her students. She grades what their ideas are, doesn't necessarily have to give them a letter grade.
Mm-hmm.
And a number grade is, why do we always tying numbers and letters to students? Let them create and grow. And here's a question. I'm going to go off topic for a second here of the questions for this morning, but Virginia ASCD just put out a question, and I think it really ties into what we're doing here. Are growth mindset innovation generational? Is this reality or stereotype?
I don't think any, I refuse to accept that people born on a certain date are genetically different, in some way. But I think people do see stuff. One of the things is we have to realize that we don't have anyone in a K-12 school system anymore who's ever gone to school in a different century. I still, I try not to be obvious about it, but laugh at schools that say, we're working toward 21st century learning. Really? Bill Clinton was doing that in 1996. He was building the bridge to the 21st century. If we haven't driven across the bridge yet, we're there's a big problem.
Absolutely, it's true.
And kids don't. One of the things that our chief information officer says is that if you watch a 5-year-old versus a 17-year-old use their phone, they use it totally differently. One group got their phones when they were 11. The other have used them since birth. And if we don't keep watching how kids' experience with the world has changed, you know, kids now don't see national borders in anywhere near the same way. They don't see technology in the same way. You know, they barely understand traditional television because there isn't an interaction mode. You know, we haven't even gotten to where Thomas Edison thought education would be in 1900. We've missed the film revolution, the radio revolution, the television revolution. We've missed all of these things. And now we're saying we're trying to get to the 21st century. We're really trying to get there from the 19th century.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
It is. And I think that one of the things that we talk about sometimes is that we have as many as 5 generations of people working in a school. And I just a shout out to Lori McCulloch and the crew from VASCD from Virginia, because it's my home group that's here for Leaders to Leaders this week with ASCD. But one of the things that I believe, and I think about one of the teachers in Albemarle whose handle on Twitter is @ChalkRelic. And this teacher, Ann Strom, I think really epitomizes for me the idea that growth and fixed mindset is not generational, that perhaps it's an orientation to how we approach the world. Because what I really see are teachers like Ann and others who represent perhaps that sort of younger baby boomer generation type, or folks that even look like me. We've got folks all over the system who are using technology in really powerful ways. Last week, I watched a couple of our teacher educators, women who work with CTE, who were teaching kids how to use paper circuitry, to do art, to do writing, stories, to make cards, you know, and they're in there teaching themselves how to use Arduinos and be able to get kids using, making wearable art, all kinds of things that really you might not associate with people that have been in education for more than a couple of decades or so. But the reality is that we've got, I think, innately, perhaps either by the way that you know, it's that nature and nurture thing. Are you a person who's more willing to take risk or less willing? But what I see, and it actually was core to the dissertation I did many years ago, when I asked the question, why do some teachers continue to evolve practice over their careers and some people tend to get stuck? And I found some things that were pretty key to that. One is that educators who really have an innate belief that they make a difference with kids tend to continue to ask questions of, what do I need to do to get this kid? How do I get this kid to be successful? So they tend to have a really high level of efficacy. I think that causes educators to take risk when they believe they really make a difference in the lives of kids. When people from outside tend to take over and control a teacher's sense of efficacy, then I think teachers give up on taking risk. The other thing that I found is that teachers who are willing to continue to evolve tend to have what they call critical friends around them, that there are teachers that they go to connect with, so that they've got somebody to ask the question if they go home at night and say what used to be the phone call of, I had a really bad day, this lesson didn't go well, and they call their critical educator friend, they're getting new ideas on the table. So they're remaining open to trying things that are new. Some people don't do that. I think the system has been set up to discourage teachers from feeling sometimes a real sense of efficacy. I think the system has been set up sometimes to discourage teachers from collaborating, that we set up time and schedules and we operate our schools in ways that it's really hard for people to have quality time to just think together on a daily basis. That's a real challenge for us.
That is definitely a challenge. And the question I'm going to ask you, Pam, because Scott just put it here. He wants to know, superintendents need to take their role in education. How are the role of superintendents in education today need to affect to make change happen?
Wow. You know, I think that one of the things that I see, and I see a lot of superintendents out there really struggling with, how do I really support up and lead up versus down? One of the things that I notice about superintendents that tend to think that way is that they're real boots on the ground superintendents. You'll see them out in schools, you'll see them listening, talking to principals, to teachers, to parents, to kids. One of the things I can tell you is that getting on Twitter was one of probably the best things I ever did. And it took me a little while, like most folks. I started in 2009 at Paula White, came to me and said, Pam, you better, think about this, because this is kind of an interesting new tool. And she got me to first sign up for Twitter in 2009. I started watching it and seeing a very few number of educators from Albemarle on it. But one of the things I realized is they were being influenced by people from outside the system. And I thought the boundaries of how superintendents define their turf have just disappeared. All of a sudden, people are influencing inside school systems. They don't have to go to conferences. They don't have to go take courses. All they have to do is log on to this thing called Twitter, and they are connecting with people who are having influence from all over the world. And I could have looked at that as a negative. I could have said, let's filter this thing called Twitter out of our system so people couldn't log on it, at least using our stuff. But the reality is, I said, you know what? What an opportunity for professional learning. I watched, I learned, and became pretty active. And one of the things I started doing was connecting with superintendents all over the country, facing similar issues, and trying to wrap around how do we really support and lead for teachers to feel that they can make the changes that we need to make to better serve kids in this century in a much more active, engaged way.
Now
So I don't know if that helps, but
that's interesting, because I remember yesterday during your presentation, you talked about the fact that you actually give your teachers in your districts an hour professional development credit when they participate in Twitter chats, which and it's something that we've always had conversations about. And I know Matt Mingle's also here, and he also believes that Twitter chats are part of PD and that it is important. So how can people prove that? Oh, I participate in chat. Do you make them hand in anything? What do you make them do?
I don't know. You guys that are out there listening to this or on Twitter that are following this, at Becky Fisher 73 was instrumental a number of years ago in orienting our division towards, and in Virginia we call districts divisions for folks that might not know that terminology. One of the things that she said is that we can either lock down access for kids and teachers and people to the world, or we can keep it as open as possible. So we have interpreted the whole sort of legal definitions of what we can and cannot do around filtering right down to the letter of the law. We don't filter anything more than we absolutely have to, because we want our kids and teachers being able to get access to YouTube and Twitter and blogs and so forth and so on. And the thing that we want to think about is that when you give that kind of access, it becomes a learning tool. So if somebody screws up, and we have kids and maybe teachers and others that sometimes do, how do you have that become something that's more about learning to be responsible and digital literacy versus having it be something that we see as, that it's more of a, what are we going to do to take technology away from kids if they supposedly abuse it or use it inappropriately? What we try to do is to see it as a learning tool. So Becky started out by saying, let's not filter anything more than we have to, and then let's see how this goes in terms of learning tools. The other thing that she said very clearly is that there are many ways that people develop themselves professionally, and that as the virtual opportunities became available, whether it was MOOCs, whether it was Twitter, whether it was being able to show that you are following the blogs of top educators that are blogging about issues that are relevant and important to your career work. One of the things that we said is, tell us what your plan is, then show us that you were involved in that, whether it's Kinder Chat or Sat Chat or Ed Chat or Social Studies Chat, or Ed Tech as Cybrary Man says, there's more chats than there are hours in the day, pretty much, I think is kind of where he sees it almost evolving. But the reality is those things are what we have evolved to see as a new way of teachers consulting with each other. The same thing that I found in my dissertation. When teachers, principals have a chance to interact and engage with others, it's about ideas, resources, questions, ways of thinking together to find solutions to common problems. So
if I go
I'm sorry,
on Twitter,
I went off.
No, that's fine.
That's perfectly fine. We have plenty of time still.
If I go on Twitter at 11 o'clock on Saturday night, I'll see at least 50 of our teachers on Twitter asking each other questions, looking at how to get things done. That's incredibly powerful. And it's, what we ask them to do is just tell us what they've done. I mean, we're not going to, one of the things I think in everything you do in education is you're not going to get building administrators or teachers to change how they treat students unless we change how we treat them. And so insisting that teachers hand in homework to prove that they did something at home is as stupid as it is for teachers to do the same. Did I just say that? Anyway.
Yeah, you did. It was online. So I had this conversation early this morning before we got here. It sometimes lasts 10 minutes.
It's fine.
Go ahead.
But, it's so important. We talk about Twitter. We talk about all this stuff. And I really do think there's, almost a chat every single hour, 24 hours a day that you can find out and you can learn.
Sometimes multiple chats.
At multiple hours.
Think about this. You don't have to stick to American chats. I often advise teachers to try, EdChat UK, EdChat IE, the Irish one.
Yeah, the one.
I like the Australian
Australian one is
Australia,
fabulous, and see what people in other countries think the norms are and think what they're struggling against. Get out of, the little circle here. So.
Yeah, because I tell you what, it took me a while to learn that EdChatty wasn't just people who like to chat more than the usual chat, that it was actually the Irish chat. So, but we met great friends. And one of the things that I've really seen that as teachers have really reached out and principals in a more global way. And that's a mindset that's an interesting thing of either defining yourself as the work I do is in a classroom or it's bounded by the school walls or by the district boundaries. All of a sudden, learning has become something that has no boundaries. So we've seen kids, probably one of the most interesting things we saw that came out of some folks connecting between Ireland and Virginia were kids having a focus on holidays. And we had some kids that were I guess, looking at traditions around why Halloween is a holiday that's out there. And the kids in Ireland were doing the same thing, and they were going back and forth, connecting that. But it was fascinating, Ira, because our kids really noticed some things about Ireland that caused them to ask some real different kinds of questions.
You need to understand that these are kindergartners. And they were talking to a wider range of age in Ireland because Ireland doesn't have age.
It's more multi-age classrooms.
Right? But the two things that first went back and forth is the Irish kids were absolutely shocked that our kids didn't have the week off for Halloween. They were devastated to learn that there were kids who were expected to go to school on Halloween. But the American kids were pretty surprised to see a crucifix on the wall of the Irish classroom. Now, you wouldn't think this would be that 5-year-olds would manage this, but they got into a real discussion of what religion was like in schools and how religion determined holidays. You open up opportunities for kids through this, and you never know what you're going to get, but it's often magical. So, and teachers who are connected internationally create kids who are connected internationally.
Yeah, and we've got so many examples of how, when something like Twitter or blogs become a part of our Vine or Instagram, we've got teachers that now are using Instagram to almost document daily what's going on in their classrooms. And we have the same rules that everybody else does about making sure that if any of our children's images are posted, that parents know that that's happening and have given us permission, or teachers figuring out how do you grab content that doesn't show kids in terms of face, but shows the actual work. And so we've got teachers that are using Vine, Instagram, a variety of tools that are really even expanding beyond. One that I kind of fell into this last week, Billy, because of you guys, was Voxer, which I had not used. And now I've been playing around with Voxer. And we've got some teachers that were in some professional development this summer that are trying to figure out, how might I use Voxer with kids to be able to share things? It could be with parents, it could be with each other. How do we use these tools as tools of learning?
And it's true, and I'll give a little shout out to my friends who we all have these wonderful orange shirts here. that we actually last year met at ASCD Leader to Leader, and we've been talking for the last year, learning, growing together through Voxer and being able to connect with not only you, with other people and at ASCD, just to be able to share ideas of what we do as educators from all over the country, which is great to be able to connect and not have barriers where we only see each other at conferences, but be able to connect with each other 24 hours, 7 days a week.
And just-in-time professional learning is essential, just as it is in every other profession these days. I have a problem. How do I solve it? You know, because if we're not teaching kids this, our kids in many of our classes will say, when they have a question, put it out on Twitter. Let's crowdsource it, figure out who's the dependable sources, who we can trust, who we can listen to. If we're not teaching this to kids, really from the very start in kindergarten, we are leaving them at a huge disadvantage in their lives. Remember, our kids are going to live their lives primarily in the late 21st century. Just want you to realize that, in the late 21st century. So.
Yeah, and I just finished a book by a guy at the University of Virginia in the Darden School that's called, the title really caught my attention, Learn or Die. And it's primarily really focused on what it is that businesses, corporations are doing to either have more of a growth orientation or a fixed orientation, and what's going to happen to those that don't have a growth orientation. But he talks a lot in it about the rise of the smart machines and the fact that it's going to wipe out significant numbers of what we today just accept will always be jobs that exist in our workforce. But one of the things that he talks about is that when machines and people come up against each other, there are some things that people do really well that we have to really focus in schools. And he says education doesn't have a lot of time to make the turn towards that this becomes the outcomes. And he talks about creativity. He talks about emotional intelligence, that people who have emotional intelligence and exercise that well with each other will always trump machines. And then he talks about that people are where the ideas come from for inventions and innovations, and that we need to be accentuating that up. And then he talks, of course, about just deep analytical thinking that goes above and beyond what anything computers have been able to do to date. But it strikes me that one of the things that we have to do in order to get there is to start thinking about that the context of what kids learn is maybe becoming a much more important part of how we build learning experience for kids than the content. And it doesn't mean that content won't have some level of importance forevermore, but we've been set up to believe that if we don't carry everything around in our heads or in some form of print, then that information doesn't exist for us today. The reality is it's all out there. So what is it that's important for our kids to need to carry around with them? And he says the most important thing happens to be the capability to work with other people, to be able to really think in very creative and critical ways, and to be able to generate ideas for solutions to things that are around you, whether it's simple or whether it's complex. And yet in school, that's kind of the things that we see as the extras on top of the content versus maybe that being the context and then building the content into it. And so it's a different way of thinking about learning.
Let me just throw something out, because if you want your students to end up, you know, determining what machines do instead of being replaced by them, you give them control over their technology. So in the room here, how many people work in schools where kids have full control over their technology? Okay, we have one. We've made sure our kids have full control over the technology. We not only have BYOD and a network that anyone can connect anything to, our kids are all administrators of their own computers. Because if they can't figure out how to control these things, what are we doing to them? And how are we setting them up for the rest of their life? This is a really essential thing, and it's really all about, you know, trusting children and believing that children and adolescents know how to learn. And so I think that's the thing. Do not set up your children to be slaves of managed machines.
And that is true. You know, it is oftentimes all of our kids I know, I teach third and fourth grade, and my kids, every single kid I know has some type of device at home.
Right.
And that's what they go home and play, or that's what they're doing when they're walking into school or on the bus or at the after school or before program. They're playing those devices. It's more of what can we use those devices for to educate our students.
Well, and you know, you think about it, and I think it really is the turn towards what do we do together to really elevate up the fact that education is the most important profession on earth. The people that are a part of that are, in my mind, that you can't find any position that exists in the workforce that is more important to continuing to fuel and accelerate and advance civilization. And when I think about advancing civilization, I think about that our kids are going to be faced in a world with an increasing population, changes in the way that climate is shifting regardless of cause, looking at water problems, at political issues, that we really are going to need kids who can really think up and be able to both be very collaboratively working together, as well as generating new things that will help us, you know, perhaps have a better world for people. And so, you know, our job is not just what we do locally, but it really is, I think, Billy, something that we've got to think about together and to really elevate this profession up, because there's nothing that is more powerful or more important than education.
And that's true. And let's segue into this last question. We have
Okay.
about 13 minutes left. I know we have to be done by 8:30 because we have another session starting right at 8:30, and I'm getting the look over there. So I will not call out that person, but this question does have to do with ASCD. And
Can we just get that other person over here?
yeah, we should. Kevin does not want to come up on stage. But what can educators do on the local, state, and national level to promote a change in education? And I think it's important. We're here at ASCD, Leader to Leader.
Yeah.
We have all the leaders here. We always are talking about policies. What can we do as leaders, as, you know, in both education? What can ASCD do to help that change in education?
So I want to kick that out to everybody that is either listening or that's on Sat Chat. What is it that you think you can do? But let's focus on that a minute. What can we do?
The first thing is stop being so afraid. You know, we're often afraid of sort of boogeymen that we don't even see. We were in Ireland visiting schools one time, and people said, well, you know, the state inspectors come around. And I said, how often do they come? And they said, once every 11 years. And I said,
7.
what's 7? I said, I got the solution to that. You know, I said, you know when they're coming? Yes. Okay. We can fake anything for, you know, once every 7 years. We put, everybody in education puts their own limits on themselves. You know, I constantly hear, even from our own teachers, well, people won't let us do that. We let teachers do virtually anything. So if they're saying that, it's that they're limiting themselves. We heard yesterday when we talked about some of the projects our kids did, well, we couldn't do that because of liability. Well, we have the same liability laws that everybody else does. And if we can do it, you could do it. It's just a decision to ask the questions and do it. You know, who said that you can't do it? And why did they say that?
I agree, Ira, that one of the things that I think that we've seen as a culture is an increase in our, what you might call, fear quotient. You know, our kids are the most protected children that have existed in any generation in America. In fact, our kids are held more closely to us as parents than they ever have. That kids, I think that there's some data out that every, I don't know, is it a generation?
Yeah.
That we decrease the distance that kids can get from parents. And now we have kids that pretty much almost have to be within line of sight, or we're really worried. I heard somebody say yesterday they have a school that's being built where their child's going to go to school, and that the school's doing something cool. They're putting a ladder in so that kids, or a slide in so that kids can go from one floor to the other with a slide, and that parents have big concerns about it. And so one of the things that they've had dialogue about is, would you be afraid for your child to be on a slide out on a playground? Well, no. So why is it a difference inside a school? Well, it just feels like it's less safe in a school. So one of the things I think we have to question is to constantly come back to that big question of why Why would we be fearful of that? What's the driver on that? But I think that for me, the most important thing around it all is that we understand that educators have always had great voice and power in this country. The loss of that is recent. That's not something that 20 years ago or 40 years ago, educators were really valued, were seen as important members of communities, had great voice in terms of influence at the state and national levels, and that somehow we've been co-opted away from that. And I think that as we have really had more pushed out to schools in terms of standardization movement, that we've subtracted from our educators their sense of agency and voice. Leaders need to restore that in any way they can. And one of the things that I say to people every time I get an opportunity is, what can you do tomorrow that will do that for folks? Even if it's the smallest step, take a baby step towards making sure that your folks really understand that they have voice, that they have the opportunity to influence what they do, and that we need to elevate that up at the association levels, whether it's ASCD or other associations, that our educators are powerful people who are committed to the most important function of any professional on earth, and that is to educate for generations that will come forward forevermore. So I'm just passionate about the fact that we educators have to take back our place as that important profession.
And that is important. I let Ira go because I see him already starting to want to say something. Go ahead, Ira.
Although to me, anyone who hasn't read, it's to me probably the most important book about education is Neil Postman and Charlie Weingartner's 1969 Teaching is Subversive Activity, which is a book that really took the open classroom and school without walls movement national from a very small base around New York and Philadelphia. And you have to understand that you have a lot more power than you think you have. And you can make arguments that people often think they, can't make. So wherever you are, and I've been in, more than one school situation, you can have impact on stuff. It doesn't really matter how you do this. When I was a 8th grade student in a very traditional school, my English teacher simply asked the class, it's a very, this would be the lowest performing class. It was actually called Dumb English by other teachers in the school. Asked us what grade we all wanted. He'd give out a class grade at the end of the year. So none of us had to worry about it. Why can't you do that? Why can't you work through things that, would really challenge people? And maybe if you made a big public announcement about it, but to take care of your children right where they are. I've taught, and my grading system looks very, very different than a lot of other people. My classroom management looks very, very different than a lot of people. You can do this, and you don't necessarily have to ask permission. Just do it. Have your defenses ready, but just do it.
I love it. So I know that we're in wrap down time,
I was going
Billy.
to say,
So
we
we're going to
have
kick it back
about
to
2
you.
or 3 more minutes left.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a question that's kicked up from out in the Twitter feed that.
There's been a lot of questions up on the Twitter
Yeah.
feed, and just trying to find one, it's
kind of
tough.
hard. Yeah.
But
So
final thoughts, you think?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that people have to realize is that there is no perfect system, and there never will be. We work hard, we make mistakes, we don't always get things right, but that I think that one of the most important things that I've learned is that over time, that if you always are coming back and putting kids at the center of your decision-making processes, whether you're a teacher, a bus driver, a principal, a superintendent, a parent, that one of the things that you're going to be doing is constantly asking yourself, is this the right thing for me to do to make sure that this child is able to get everything that they can get as a learner who is empowered, who themselves have a sense of agency, and that they own their own learning. And for me, that's important. it's one of the things I love about ASCD and you know, have deep roots in the National Association at the state level as well, that, you know, there is no association that has centered more on the concept of how do we lead for going after the very best things that we can do for young people through a pedagogical lens, a curriculum lens, an assessment lens. And so I just want to do a shout out to ASCD for continuing to ask the tough questions of how do we evolve as an association to better meet the needs of the folks that we serve, change that user experience so that we are really moving our association forward. And in doing that, we're going to be moving education forward as a nation.
And I think that's important. I would like to also thank ASCD for allowing us to have this live chat.
Yeah.
Kevin Scott especially, and Walter McKenzie, who said, sure, let's try it. Why not? At the conference and added it to the agenda. So thank you.
Absolutely. And follow ASCD at ASCD. So.
And I just want to also, you know, Scott and Brad also say hi. They send their regards. They regret the fact they couldn't be here this morning.
Hi,
but
Scott. Hi, Brad.
they had
Miss you.
family obligations they had to take care of.
Yeah.
So thank you both for being here. Thank you both for being guests. And
Loved it.
Thanks.
we'll continue the day.
Yep.
Super. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin, for having us.